African father in America. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. African father in America. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze.
You are listening to African Father in America podcast by Simon Javan Okello, live from Seattle, Washington, USA.
Greetings, beautiful people. My name is Simon Javan Okello, and I'm excited to be here with you today. It's really a wonderful, opportunity to be with my sister Carine Kaneza Nantulya, who is the Africa Advocacy Director within the Africa Division at Human Rights Watch. Carine and I already had a conversation previously, which is an episode that has not been released to the public yet. But, when we talked, we just really had a great time, and we were also navigating our kids in the background. I'm a father of 3 kids, and Carine has, how many kids do you have? 2 kids. Yeah, so, and the African Father in America is a platform for celebrating African families and, Black fatherhood. So, having kids interrupt the momentum of our conversation was a nice thing, actually. But, there were 2 points that we really didn't discuss enough, that I really, feel lucky that Carine was able to join us to continue discussing. But particularly, we are just going to talk about structural racism, and we are going to speak a little bit about the article that Carine wrote on July 1st, 2020 on the Human Rights Watch website. And I'm just going to read a quick excerpt from it to just give you a little context. Today, African Americans and Black Africans remain subjected to the harmful effects of global anti-Black racism, in which much of the global society, regardless of how long since it has dismantled the legal structures of slavery or colonialism, still actively undermines and treats Black people as inferior. It was therefore appropriate that the Africa Union chairperson, Musa Mahamat Faki, issued a statement denouncing Floyd's killing. So, the African Father in America podcast is also a place where we do storytelling, So, Carine, I just wanted you to take me down memory lane, where you think this, structural racism started and where it could go based on the current momentum, which is also the spirit of the article that you wrote, and how can we take care of ourselves in the process. But there is work to be done around it.
That's a very loaded question, Simon. Asking me to define structural racism and how to address it and how we can take care of ourselves in the process, that's pretty difficult. But I'm going to try responding to it, starting with the article. You see, before I started the article, writing the article, and if you remember, you mentioned that excerpt, but I also my opening line is really a quote from Nkrumah,
right?
Where he says something extremely powerful, and he mentions the building of the protest movements at that time in the 60s, and how the movements were basically signaling the end of an entire empire. When he mentions, when Kwame Nkrumah, unfortunately I didn't have the privilege and the honor to meet him.
Right.
But I would dare think that when he was talking about the concept of an empire, as much as he was mentioning the structural, the architecture of an apartheid at that time, but also the mindset and the spirit that infrastructure and architecture had at that time. It was built around a narrative, around the fact that African people and people of African descent to be held inferior and to be given a fair chance to basically not only survive, but even beyond surviving, fulfill their destiny, their visions, and just be equal to everybody else. So when he talks about that, that quote speaks to the issue of resilience, the necessity, the imperious necessity of Africans to be resilient. So before I wrote that article, what I had in mind, I was really filled with, I would say, surprise and at some point, at moments, disbelief when remember the protest in Europe, for instance, where statues were dismantled.
Right.
The ongoing movement of people, white and blacks alike, the street, demanding equality, demanding dignity. So that was, if I was to mention I think the backstory to the article, that's what it is. The other part to it is that the reason why we saw this moment, and we still see this momentum today, it is because people are still suffering from it. The African Union, and hence the article, the African Union was built when its predecessor, the Organization of the African Unity, was established in 1963. It was on the premise that this was an organization that was going to exactly do what we see now, people on the street. It was an organization that was going to fight, protect people's dignity, demand their dignity, and push back against colonialism and apartheid. And ultimately, it was an organization that was supposed to challenge white supremacy.
So you're saying the Organization of African Unity, or the Africa Union as it is now, should have been doing some of the work that Black Lives Matter is doing.
Absolutely.
Right.
What I think is that the founding principles and the founding values were exactly that. It was built around the necessity, to protect and Black lives. And so, and as I mentioned in my article, it was not a surprise for us to see the chairperson of the African Commission, Musa Muhammad Faki, to see him issuing such statement. Coherent, this was a coherent gesture given of the organization. It was even more coherent to see the chairperson referring to a very specific event in 1994, was the conference on racism. As I mentioned last time, you even had emblematic figures within the Black community in the US at the conference. Someone like Malcolm X, who made an urgent plea towards the African heads of state who were present at that time, asking them to basically come in solidarity and request the United Nations to set up a commission of inquiry under the auspices of the United Nations. So that's in a nutshell what was, some of the issues I really wanted to bring in the article. Another issue that is linked, which really prompted me to write the article, is the fact that when we talk about racism today, we also have to remember that the other foundational principle upon which the African Union was built is the issue of human dignity. And that one brings me, and that issue brings me to what we see on the continent today.
Right.
Because if you read my article, the first part of the article is squarely addressing the similarities between what African Americans and Africans on the continent face.
Right.
Towards the end of the article, I then move into really calling upon the African Union to look within itself.
Right.
And use the mechanisms that it has to actually address police brutality.
Right.
And violations within the African continent.
Right.
Because I believe that we can only be better,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm pretty sure whether it's you and others share that belief, that we can only be better at addressing issues or building on momentums that are happening outside of our borders,
Mm-hmm.
when we are stronger within our own within our own house, if I
Right.
may. So that's the other issue, which for me is very important.
Right. There are two things that comes to my mind as I listen to you share, these issues. Two things. One is I read somebody's post on social media recently, like yesterday, that the future of being an African is going to be determined by how well you know other African countries and Africans living in the diaspora. And then the other thing, which is just a thought, is I feel like the African Union is very toothless. They probably have tools and policies in place that could make them such a powerful organization, but I've never seen them do something that is monumental. Do you think that's a fair statement to make?
Yes.
Okay.
Monumental? No. Yes and no. I think, look, you and I were, I was born in the 70s. You must have been born in the 80s or 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I look at the what has happened since the 70s, let's look at what the African Union has done.
Okay.
There were a force to reckon with when it came to the issue of apartheid.
Mm-hmm.
The entire union,
right,
was really organized and mobilizing around the issue of apartheid. Let's look at the independence era.
Mm-hmm.
They were very instrumental at fighting for the independence of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
What one could say is that when you look at what the African Union looks like today,
mm-hmm.
you're going to realize that within its member states, the presidents and the leaders who were fighting against colonialism or against, as I always call it, the first struggle.
Mm.
And there was a second struggle against military dictatorship.
Right.
Those who fought against military dictatorship are now still in power, and yet they have signed protocols, what you call the African Union Protocol on Democracy and Elections. And they are currently the ones oppressing, some of them, through their military and security apparatuses. They are now oppressing their countrymen and women. So that is what I call the challenge of the African Union today. How do you remain relevant? How do you go back to what you were? What it was and what inspired at that time. Other the Kwame Nkrumahs, times of the Thomas Sankaras, times of the Sekou Toures. What it was then, that's what it needs to become today. It needs to go back to that place where there was an agreement that if going to be an African Commission on human rights, it had to be people's driven.
Right.
The African Commission, which is the counterpart of the American Inter-American Commission, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is one of the most advanced human rights tool we have. It's very different. It's unique in a way it works and interacts with citizens on the ground in the continent. You're not find any other organ that works like that in the world. It was one of the very first commission to push for what you would call the right to development, the right to health. Very progressive, very controversial discussions have taken place under the auspices of the African Union. Yes, last year, the African Free Trade Agreement was ratified.
Right.
The free movement of goods and people. But for me, when I look at what it has achieved a lot, but what the challenge now is democratization. The challenge now, what I see, is what I call the institutionalization of human dignity, where you have to decentralize the power within states and institutions like the African Union and organize a truly people-driven process of interaction and decision making. That is what is the biggest challenge.
Right.
I'm hopeful. I think as long as we have men and women of conviction, like yourself and others, as long as we have people who are ready to, push back and challenge the status quo, as long as we still have, young people ready to go on the streets and protest like the ones in Sudan. We will always see change happening.
Right. So, let's say I'm talking to a group of teenagers here in Seattle, Africans who are living here and African Americans. What's interesting is that they are very connected because they go to college together, they're on TikTok together, So,
yeah.
While we think that Africans and African Americans are so divided, they only do that after they graduate from college. It becomes potent when people are now competing for resources, But let's say you're talking to them or we are having this conversation with them, how do we help them understand more about the potential that the AU has? Because you described some of the successes that the AU historically has had, and we've also talked even of the most recent, success of the, the trade agreement between countries, so that all countries in Africa can trade freely, amongst each other. What can we tell them that, such a huge organization that could literally transform the conditions of our people globally, and enhance the economic exchange, enhance the educational opportunities amongst our peoples globally? I think the AU is like a sleeping giant, and sometimes I feel a little even ashamed to let people know that such a thing exists, because the narrative about how horrible Africa is and how people pity us, when we interact with African Americans, unless you're somebody that has done the work like myself and they respect you because you've earned it, a lot of the time it's so hard to get trust with African Americans or even white folks that we work with because of what they've been told that we are,
Yes.
So how do you sell the AU to young people, and also how do you even sell the potential that Africa has to young people?
I was having a discussion with my 15-year-old daughter and some of her friends a few days ago, and a similar question was asked. One of her friends said, but Auntie Carine, it's very difficult to love and be proud of Africa. Difficult. you see images and pictures of kids, with flies, around their face, we see pictures of war, so it's hard. It's hard for a kid who, who's African or non-African in the US or in the West in general, to picture an Africa that is that's beautiful, that's standing upright, that's successful. And this is what I said to them. I said, I think first of all you need to want to know more. More of this is going to boil down to personal work. That's what you did, Simon. That's what I did as well. It's about your personal curiosity,
right?
And really satisfying your need to know. I'm not going to be that kind of person, I'm afraid, and might be very controversial, but you need to have the right type of mindset. That's the first thing. The second thing is, how do I sell the African Union? Literally, sometimes, most of the time, I say, you don't have a choice, because Africa is the youngest continent. It's a continent that everyone, whether you're talking about Western policymakers, its own policymakers, scientists, economists, will tell you this is a continent that has endless potential. I'm not the this. This is something you just have to Google and do.
Right.
That is the first thing. And the other thing is, because it's a young population, there is a certain dynamism about it.
Yeah.
Africa is not stagnant.
Right.
And if for any young person who's curious enough, a little bit, just to to kind of wander around and look at Southern Africa, West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, we are the entire world in one. Really, that's what I tell my kids. I'm like, you have color, you have every culture,
right?
You have hundreds of languages. You have historical anthropology that ranges from empires to emperors to pharaohs to Amazons. You have everything. So that's my narrative, my description of Africa today. Obviously.
Right. Thank you. I can talk to you for days, I really feel lucky that we met, I really do.
No, me too.
Yeah.
No. It's not every day that you meet someone who's, interested, to have these kinds of conversations and simple conversations, not the conversations I'm usually used to, which is, policy oriented and advocacy oriented, sometimes technical, but just a conversation where you talk simply and you just say what you think is add some value.
Yesterday I was having a conversation with the simplicity of our conversation now reminded me of a different conversation I was having with an activist from Mathare. Mathare is the second largest slum in Kenya.
Yes.
Her name is Rachel Mwikali, and she's a board member of Amnesty International in Kenya. So she has her own organization. She's organizing women, and I don't know if I told you, but last month we raised, seed money to help 500 women, rescue their business from collapsing as a result of this economic crisis,
Wow.
So our goal was 500 women. We were able to raise, seed money for 106. So we will still go back to finishing after we distribute the seed money to the first 106. We are filming right now, and she's one of the people on the ground. So I have to connect with her, Rachel. Anyhow, so I was talking to her and just listening to her, the wealth of knowledge that she has, And I'm like, I just need to put a microphone and a camera on you to educate people, And then I told her that we had connected, and she was just so curious and interested. And, she read your article, and I just wanted to tell you that, when you write things like this, you don't know who is going to read it, So thank you for doing, this writing and taking your time to create pieces like this. And I just wanted to end our conversation at this note and, just let everybody who is listening or watching today's African Father in America episode with Carine Kaneza Nantulya, who is the Africa Advocacy Director within the Africa Division at Human Rights Watch. This is the second conversation we are having. Previously, we talked about her story and, and a lot of the work that she does. But today we were talking particularly about an article that she wrote on July 1st. It's titled, Africa Union Must Keep Momentum to End Structural Racism. And it's on the Human Rights Watch website, so you can check it out. Then we covered several topics. We talked about, structural racism. We talked about, the role of Africa Union and, the power that Africa Union had from the beginning in 1964 and how it has evolved, and even the recent wins that Africa as a continent has had. Then we talked about, the difficulty in celebrating Africa sometime because of how our story is being told, which is part of why, I'm doing this podcast to help, tell our stories before other people tell it. But, the other thing that we talked about was, the potential that Africa has. Africa is the youngest continent in the world, and, most countries, if you look at Uganda, the people like Bobi Wine became members of parliament because majority of, the population is like less than 30, So with that, I also just want to thank you for subscribing to the African Father in America podcast on, iTunes. Remember to rate it and leave your comments there. And just, take good care of yourself. We're still within the coronavirus pandemic, so make sure you are putting yourself as the number one priority. Now, Carine, anything that I didn't ask you that you just want to leave us with as we wind up?
I think I'm going to just say that one of the key challenges that Africa has is what I would call a crisis of ethics, and that we need to go back to that ethical leadership that we remember from people like Nelson Mandela and others. But we can do it. We can go back to it. It's all about ethics and morals and values, ultimately. Value-driven processes and value-driven mindsets. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you again for staying so late in the East Coast. You're in DC, right?
Yes, I'm in DC.
Yeah.
But it was worth my while. Don't worry.
Thank you. How do you say thank you in Kirundi?
In Kirundi.
Yeah.
Murakoze.
Murakoze. How do you say thank you so much?
Murakoze chane.
Murakoze chane. Okay, my dear. Take care, okay?
It's a Bantu language. You take care as well.
Okay, bye. Murakoze. Okay.
Father in America. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. Tujikaze, tujikaze, jikaze. African Father in America.